Hello, and welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here, and I truly appreciate you listening today. If you enjoy the stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, let's settle in and enjoy today's stories. The wind howled through the dense jungle like a wounded animal, a constant reminder that we were trespassing in a place that had not welcomed human footsteps in centuries. The expedition had started as a simple archaeological survey, but it quickly turned into something else, something much darker. My name is Dr. Emily Hawkins, a field archaeologist with a specialty in ancient civilizations. I've led dozens of expeditions into remote parts of the world, chasing after myths and uncovering forgotten histories. But nothing in my career had prepared me for what we were about to discover in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. It all began when we received an unmarked envelope at the university. Inside was a map, old, weathered, with edges burnt like it had been rescued from a fire. It depicted a part of the Amazon basin with a small red X marked deep in the jungle, far beyond any known settlement or documented ruins. Accompanying the map was a single sheet of paper with a hastily scrawled note. Find the lost city of Viracocha. Beware the guardians of the unseen. The lost city of Viracocha. I had heard rumors, of course. Stories passed down by indigenous tribes. Myths about an ancient civilization that predated even the Incas. A place said to be protected by something ancient and powerful, but no credible evidence had ever surfaced. Still, the mystery intrigued me. We were between projects, and the allure of a forgotten city was too much to resist. I gathered a small team, just 5 of us. Myself, my trusted assistant David, a local guide named Alejandro, and 2 graduate students, Rachel and Mark, eager for adventure. 2 weeks later, we were on a plane bound for Manaus, the gateway to the Amazon. The journey was brutal. The humidity wrapped around us like a wet blanket, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. We traveled by boat for several days, navigating winding rivers until the water became too shallow to continue. From there, we hacked our way through the jungle on foot, following the map, guided by Alejandro's knowledge of the terrain. Every step felt heavy, as if the very air resisted our presence. Alejandro seemed nervous, constantly glancing around and muttering prayers under his breath. On the 3rd night, he confided in me. "Dr. Hawkins," he said, his voice low, "I do not think we should be here. The tribes speak of this place with fear. They say it is cursed, protected by spirits that do not welcome outsiders." I tried to reassure him, but his words left me uneasy. We pressed on, but the jungle seemed to close in around us, the canopy overhead blocking out the sun, casting us into a perpetual twilight. Strange noises echoed from the shadows, clicks, rustles, and the occasional distant howl. It felt as if the jungle itself was alive and watching us. Then, on the 7th day, we found it. The first sign was a stone pillar, covered in moss and vines, half buried in the undergrowth. We cleared the vegetation and saw the carvings, ancient symbols I had never seen before, intricate and almost hypnotic in their design. They seemed to shift and change under the light, as if they were alive. David, my assistant, examined the pillar closely. These carvings, they look pre-Columbian, but I don't recognize the style. It's like nothing I've ever seen. We continued, finding more pillars and broken statues, all leading towards a massive stone archway. The entrance was overgrown, nearly hidden by the dense foliage, but there was no mistaking it. This was the gateway to something ancient. As we stepped through the arch, an unnatural chill swept over us. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, as if the very ground was vibrating with some unseen force. The jungle fell silent. No birds, no insects, just a deep, oppressive silence. Mark, one of the grad students, shivered. Is it just me, or did it suddenly get colder? It's not just you, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Stay close. We don't know what we're dealing with here. We moved deeper into the ruins, the remains of a once great city slowly revealing themselves. There were massive stone structures, collapsed but still imposing, covered in vines and moss. The architecture was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Alien, almost otherworldly, with angles and shapes that defied normal geometry. We found an open courtyard, at the center of which stood a large stone obelisk, covered in more of the strange carvings. It was here that Alejandro stopped abruptly, his face pale. We should not go further, he whispered. This place, it is wrong. The Guardians... Guardians? Rachel asked, her voice tinged with fear. Alejandro nodded. The unseen ones. They protect this place. We are not meant to be here. But we had come too far to turn back. I approached the obelisk, running my fingers over the carvings. They felt warm, almost alive under my touch. I glanced back at the team. We need to document this. Set up the equipment. We may have just discovered the greatest archaeological find of the century. We spent the next several hours setting up camp and documenting the site. As night fell, an uneasy feeling settled over us. The jungle, usually alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, was eerily silent. David and I were examining a large stone tablet when we heard it. A distant, low hum, like a vibration in the air. It grew louder, and a strange fog began to seep through the trees, curling around our camp like ghostly tendrils. "What the hell is that?" Mark whispered, looking around nervously. Before anyone could answer, the fog thickened, and Alejandro screamed, a guttural, primal sound that sent shivers down my spine. We turned to see him standing at the edge of the camp, his eyes wide with terror. "Run!" he shouted. "They are here!" And then he was gone, vanishing into the mist as if swallowed by the jungle itself. We called out for him, but there was no answer, just the growing hum and the thick, impenetrable fog. Panic set in. We grabbed our flashlights and began searching, calling Alejandro's name, but he was nowhere to be found. It was as if he had been erased from existence. Rachel was the first to break down. "We need to leave. Now this place is cursed." But the path we had taken into the ruins had vanished, swallowed by the fog. We were trapped. We huddled together in the center of the courtyard, the fog pressing in on all sides. The hum grew louder, and the carvings on the obelisk seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. I felt a strange sensation, like the ground was shifting beneath us. "Do you feel that?" David asked, his voice tense. I nodded, fear clawing at my insides. "Something's changing." Suddenly the fog lifted, and we found ourselves standing in a different place. The ruins around us had shifted. Walls that had been collapsed were now whole, and structures that had been hidden were now visible. The air was different, too. Heavier, more oppressive. Mark's voice trembled. "What just happened?" "It's like we've been moved," I said, trying to make sense of it. Or, like reality itself has shifted. Rachel was staring at the obelisk, her face pale. "Look." The carvings on the stone were changing, shifting like liquid, forming new patterns and symbols. And then, as if guided by an unseen hand, they began to glow. A low, guttural voice echoed around us, speaking in a language none of us could understand. The ground trembled, and a shape began to emerge from the shadows, tall, indistinct, with eyes that glowed like embers. The Guardians. The figures moved slowly, their forms shifting and flickering like shadows caught in a fire. They were tall, with elongated limbs and faces that seemed to blur and distort, never quite solid. Their eyes were deep, endless voids, drawing in the light around them. David stepped back, his voice barely a whisper. What are they?" "The Guardians," Alejandro had warned us, but now it was too late. One of the figures raised a hand, and the air around us grew colder. I felt a pressure in my chest, like something was squeezing my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The figure pointed at Mark, and he screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut through the air. His body seemed to convulse, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. Then, with a final agonizing scream, he vanished, gone as if he had never been there at all. Rachel fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. David grabbed my arm, his face pale with fear. "Emily, we have to get out of here, now." But there was no escape. The figures were closing in, the air thick with their presence. I felt my mind slipping, reality bending around me like a funhouse mirror. In that moment, as the Guardians surrounded us, I understood. This place, this city, it wasn't just ancient. It was outside of time, a nexus point where different realities converged. The Guardians were not protecting the ruins. They were protecting the barriers between worlds. We had crossed a line, disturbed something we couldn't comprehend. And now, we were paying the price. I could feel the pull of the unseen, dragging us into the depths of whatever lay beyond the physical world. My vision blurred, my thoughts became disjointed. David was saying something, but his words were lost in the growing hum that filled my mind. The last thing I saw was the obelisk, glowing brighter, the symbols twisting and turning, telling a story I could never understand. And then, darkness. I woke up in a hospital bed, the sterile white walls a stark contrast to the suffocating jungle I had left behind. My body ached, and my mind was a fog of confusion and fear. David was there, sitting beside me, his face gaunt and hollow. "We're the only ones left," he said quietly. "Rachel, Mark, Alejandro, they're gone." "What happened?" I asked, my voice weak. David shook his head. "I don't know. The authorities found us wandering near the edge of the jungle, delirious. No one believes what we saw. They think we just got lost, that we hallucinated everything. But I knew better. The memories of that place, of the Guardians, were burned into my mind. The city of Viracocha wasn't just lost. It was hidden, protected by forces beyond our understanding. And now, having glimpsed the other side, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us back. Something unseen, waiting. If you're reading this, remember, some places should remain forgotten, some mysteries unsolved. Because once you open the door to the unknown, there's no going back. The jungle swallowed them whole. Every step forward felt like being drawn deeper into a labyrinth of green walls, the thick canopy overhead blotting out the sun. Shadows danced beneath the towering trees, and the hum of life in the Amazon surrounded the group like an unseen orchestra. Leaves rustled, birds screeched, and somewhere in the distance, a low growl echoed through the foliage. The team of 6 had come searching for a myth, tales of a forgotten civilization that had been swallowed by the jungle, long ago whispered in academic circles. The locals called it Yupanqui, a city said to possess unimaginable treasures, guarded by the jungle itself. Some believed it never existed, others said those who sought it never returned. But for Dr. Michael Carrington, the discovery of Yupanqui could redefine history, and for that, he was willing to take the risk. Days earlier, when they first left the river, morale had been high. They had machetes to cut through the vines, maps marked with promising trails, and supplies that should have lasted them weeks. But the deeper they ventured into the jungle, the more everything began to slip away. First, the map stopped making sense. Landmarks that should have been there were absent, and pathways once thought clear were blocked by dense, twisted growth. Then came the insects. Their bites became an incessant torment, and the buzzing, constant, droning, wore down their nerves. Finally the rain began, not the soft showers they had expected, but torrential downpours that pounded against their makeshift shelters and soaked them to the bone. That night, the jungle felt alive in a way that made their skin crawl. Strange, unidentifiable sounds echoed through the camp. Soft footfalls in the underbrush, the distant howl of creatures unfamiliar to even the most experienced among them. And then there was the figure. It started with whispers. Luis, the local guide who had led them so far into the jungle, mentioned it in passing, the fleeting image of a man standing in the shadows, watching them from the tree line. At first, no one believed him. Fatigue and stress, they said. But soon, others began to catch glimpses, a silhouette just beyond the firelight, unmoving and silent. Whenever they tried to approach, the figure would vanish, melting into the dense foliage as if it had never been there. But the feeling of being watched never left. By the 5th day, supplies were running low and tensions were high. Jared, the expedition's photographer, had become withdrawn, muttering about shapes in the trees that seemed to move when he wasn't looking. Isabel, the linguist, grew sick, feverish, with strange marks appearing on her skin, like tiny bruises in patterns that none of them could explain. That night, Luis vanished. His bedroll lay empty, his gear untouched. No signs of a struggle, no trail to follow. It was as if the jungle had simply swallowed him whole. Panic rippled through the group, but there was nothing they could do. They searched until dawn, but found no trace. The next morning, Dr. Carrington insisted they press on. They were too close, he said, to turn back now, but the jungle seemed to change after that. Paths they had traveled just days before no longer existed. The landscape shifted in ways that defied logic. Trees twisted in unnatural ways. Roots rose from the ground like skeletal hands, and the air grew thick with a musty, oppressive weight. It was as though the jungle itself was pushing them deeper, guiding them into the heart of something ancient and unseen. The figure reappeared, this time closer, more distinct. Its eyes, dark and hollow, seemed to follow their every movement, but it never spoke, never approached. It simply watched, waiting for something. On the 7th day, Jared snapped. He screamed into the jungle, demanding the figure reveal itself, throwing equipment and supplies into the underbrush in a fit of rage. His screams echoed through the trees, only to be met with eerie silence. Then, without warning, he bolted into the forest. The group chased after him, but he was too fast, his frenzied cries growing fainter until they were swallowed by the jungle's depths. They never saw him again. Now, there were only 4. Carrington, Isabel, Marcus, and Ellie, the team's medic. Fear hung over them like a shroud, each one of them waiting for the next to vanish. As they pressed on, something about the jungle began to change again. The air grew heavier, the trees more twisted, almost unnatural in their formation. The dense vines and foliage seemed to have a purpose, guiding them, no, trapping them, within a maze of their own making. And always, the figure remained, silent, watching. On the 10th day, they found the ruins. Yupanqui was real, or at least it had been. The crumbling stone structures were barely visible beneath the overgrowth, but the remnants of ancient carvings and collapsed temples spoke of a once thriving civilization. But there was no sense of triumph, no feeling of victory. The city was a tomb, a place that should have been left undisturbed. Isabel collapsed near the entrance to what seemed like a temple. Her fever had worsened, her skin now a patchwork of dark bruises and strange symbols that none of them could understand. She murmured incoherently, her words a mix of ancient dialects and warnings. "Something is here," she whispered before losing consciousness. It was Marcus who found the altar deep within the temple, a stone slab covered in intricate carvings, depicting a godlike figure surrounded by the dead. Offerings of bones and gold lay scattered at its base, but what caught their attention was the small statue in the center. It was carved from a dark stone, its eyes hollow and lifeless, yet somehow it seemed to pulse with a strange energy. They shouldn't have touched it, but Carrington, driven by desperation and obsession, reached out. The ground trembled, the walls groaned, and the jungle outside fell deathly silent. The figure finally moved. Emerging from the shadows, it stepped into the temple, its form now clear. Not a man, but something older, something that had waited centuries for this moment. Its eyes, black and endless, fixed on Carrington as it extended a hand. "You were never meant to find this place," it whispered, in a voice like the rustling of leaves. And one by one, the jungle reclaimed them. The last thing Ellie heard before darkness took her was the sound of the jungle, the endless hum of life and death entwined, and the whispered promise that they too would become part of the forgotten. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you've heard and want to hear more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps the channel grow, and I truly appreciate your support.